The skies of Australis burned crimson as the sun set over the crystalline spires of Kelder City. Once, this view had inspired poetry from even the most logical Keldorians. Now, it only reminded them of their approaching doom. Elder Juwu stood at the wide viewport of the High Council chamber, his four-fingered hands clasped behind his back. The subtle ridges along his blue-tinged skin caught the fading light. He had lived through 247 solar cycles, but never had he faced a crisis of this magnitude. "Elder, the council members have arrived," said his aide, Minho. Juwu nodded, his large eyes blinking vertically. "Send them in." The chamber doors slid open with a soft hiss. 7 Keldorians entered, each wearing the distinctive silver robes of the planetary leadership. They took their places around the circular table, their movements precise and efficient, a cultural hallmark of their species. Ambassador Taeyeon, younger than most council members at only 103 cycles, was the last to enter. His recent return from exploratory missions to other systems had given him unique insight that the others lacked. "I have called this emergency session because time has become our enemy," Juwu began. "Scientist Daehyun will present the latest findings." Daehyun rose from her seat. Her slender frame seemed to carry the weight of their entire civilization as she activated the holographic projector at the center of the table. A perfect three-dimensional model of their planet appeared, rotating slowly. Then, the simulation began. From the core outward, a red glow spread. The planet's layers shifted, buckled, and finally collapsed in a catastrophic implosion. "Our simulations are clear. Astralis will collapse within a solar cycle," Juwu announced gravely. "The quantum fluctuations in our core have accelerated beyond our previous models." Silence filled the chamber. The Keldorians were not prone to emotional outbursts, but the slight trembling of their inner eyelids revealed their distress. "Can we evacuate to our colonies?" asked Yunji, the resource director. Daehyun shook her head. "Our largest colony holds barely 10,000. We are 12 million, and even those colonies depend on resources from Australis." "What about the stabilization technology?" asked Hyuno, the defense coordinator. "The project has consumed half our resources for the past decade." "Failed," Daehyun replied, her voice flat, but her inner eyelids closing completely, a sign of profound regret. "The quantum disruptors cannot contain the cascading reaction. We have tried 7 different approaches. All have failed." Another silence fell, heavier than the first. For a species that had mastered space travel, harnessed antimatter, and developed technology that less advanced races might consider magical, failure was nearly incomprehensible. Ambassador Taeyeon leaned forward, his fingers tapping on the table's surface. "There is one possibility we haven't discussed." All eyes turned to him. Taeyeon touched a control, and the hologram shifted to show a blue-green planet circling a yellow star. "Earth, the 3rd planet of the Sol system." "The humans," Jeannot scoffed. "They've barely left their own planet. Their technology is primitive by our standards." "Yes," Taeyeon agreed, "but their planet is stable, rich in resources, and large enough to accommodate refugees." "Would they even help us?" asked Yunji. "From my understanding of your reports, they are emotional, unpredictable, and often hostile to each other." Taeyeon's inner eyelids flickered, the equivalent of a thoughtful frown. "They are all those things, but they are also surprisingly adaptable, creative in ways we are not, and capable of great compassion." He touched another control, and images of human achievements appeared. Hospitals, disaster relief efforts, scientific breakthroughs. "I have observed them for 20 cycles now. Yes, they war with each other. Yes, they damage their environment. But they also heal, rebuild, and innovate at a remarkable pace. And they value diversity of thought in a way our civilization has never embraced." Elder Juwu turned from the viewport to face the council. "What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador?" "That we seek sanctuary on Earth, offer our knowledge in exchange for a home. Our technology could solve many of their problems. Their planet could save our species. Defense Coordinator Shunho's skin paled to a lighter blue. Submit ourselves to the mercy of primitives. Become dependent on them. This is unthinkable. More unthinkable than extinction. Taeyun challenged. Scientist Daeun, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke. The ambassador's suggestion has merit from a practical standpoint. Earth's environment is 87% compatible with our biological needs. The remaining issues could be addressed with relatively simple technology. But would they welcome us? 12 million refugees, asked Dunji. Not all at once, said Taeyun. We send a delegation first. Establish contact. Negotiate terms. We have ships that could transport 10,000 at a time. Elder Juwu raised his hand for silence. This requires careful consideration. Our entire future is at stake. He activated his personal console. Each council member will review the complete data on Earth and human civilization. We reconvene in 12 hours to vote. Later that night, Taeyun stood on the balcony of his living quarters, watching the strange new patterns of energy that occasionally flashed deep in the planet's atmosphere. Visual evidence of the core's deterioration. His communication device chimed. Ambassador, it's Taeyun. May I visit you? I have concerns about your proposal. Minutes later, the scientist entered his quarters. Without formal greetings, she placed a data crystal on his table. These are my personal observations of the core deterioration. The official report I gave the council today was optimistic. Taeyun felt his heart rate increase. How much time do we really have? Half a cycle, at most. The ambassador sank into a chair. Half a cycle to convince humans to help us, begin evacuation, and transport 12 million Keldorians. Yes, Daeun's voice trembled slightly. I've run every scenario, Taeyun. We have no choice. We must seek their help. When the council reconvened, the vote was not unanimous, but the majority sided with Taeyun's proposal. 3 days later, the finest ship in the Keldorian fleet, the Astral Hope, was prepared for the journey to Earth. Taeyun would lead the diplomatic mission, with Daeun and a small team of scientists and cultural experts. On the morning of their departure, Elder Juwu met Taeyun at the launch platform. The future of our people rests on your shoulders, Ambassador, the elder said. Taeyun lowered his head in respect. I understand the responsibility. No, said Juwu, placing a hand on Taeyun's shoulder, an unusually emotional gesture for a Keldorian. I don't think you do, because I'm sending you with one final directive that the council has not approved. Taeyun's eyes widened. If the humans reject our request, you are authorized to share everything. All our technology, all our knowledge, even the restricted databases. Elder, that would violate our most sacred protocols of cultural non-interference. Our protocols will mean nothing if our species no longer exists, Juwu said firmly. The survival of our people comes before all else. As the Astral Hope rose through the atmosphere of Astralis, Taeyun watched his homeworld grow smaller. The beautiful blue-green planet was marred now by swirling storms and unexplained dark patches where the deteriorating core affected the surface. Beside him, Daeun studied the Earth data one more time. They are so different from us, she murmured. Emotional, unpredictable, divided by thousands of years of separate development. Yes, Taeyun agreed. And that may be exactly why they're our only hope. We need a solution we cannot imagine ourselves. The ship accelerated, leaving Astralis behind. Ahead lay Earth and the uncertain mercy of humanity. Dr. Hannah Park rubbed her tired eyes and took another sip of cold coffee. 3 nights with barely any sleep, but she couldn't tear herself away from the observatory. Not with what she was seeing. There it is again, she whispered to herself, adjusting the massive telescope's focus. The anomaly had first appeared as a faint blip on the deep space monitoring system at the Yangzhou Observatory outside Seoul. Most of her colleagues had dismissed it as a comet or asteroid, but Hannah knew better. The object's trajectory had changed twice now, something natural objects simply didn't do. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd been instructed to use only in extraordinary circumstances. "This is Dr. Park. I need to speak with General Kim immediately. Priority code Alpha 7. 20 minutes later, her computer screen displayed the stern face of General Jun Kim, head of South Korea's newly formed Space Defense Initiative. "Dr. Park, it's 3 a.m. This had better be important." Hannah shared her screen, showing the telescope's live feed. "Sir, I've been tracking this object for 3 days now. It's approximately 300 meters in length, moving at variable speeds, and has changed direction multiple times." The general leaned closer to his camera. "Natural explanation?" "None, sir. It's definitely artificial," she told General Kim. "And it's heading straight for Earth. Hostile. Unknown. But its current trajectory will bring it to Earth in approximately 72 hours. It appears to be decelerating." General Kim's expression remained neutral, but Hannah noted how his shoulders tensed. "I'll notify the President and our international partners. Continue monitoring and send hourly reports. I'm sending a security detail to the observatory." "Sir, I don't need. This isn't optional, Dr. Park. If what you're seeing is real, everything changes today." Within hours, observatories around the world confirmed Hannah's findings. The object was approaching Earth at a controlled speed, following a path that would place it over the Central Pacific. Hannah found herself suddenly thrust into a world of military protocols and emergency government meetings. Her small observatory became a hub of activity, with military personnel setting up communication equipment and additional monitoring systems. By the second day, she had been relocated to a secure facility in Seoul, where she joined a hastily assembled team of scientists, military officials, and government representatives from around the world via video conference. "The UN Security Council has approved a coordinated response plan," announced the American representative. "All nations with anti-satellite capabilities are on high alert, but no aggressive actions will be taken unless the object demonstrates hostile intent." "And how exactly will we determine hostile intent?" asked Hannah, earning disapproving glances from some of the military officials. General Kim, seated beside her, actually smiled slightly. "A fair question, Dr. Park, which is why you're here. We need scientists who understand what we're seeing." On the morning of the third day, Hannah stood in the command center watching multiple screens tracking the object's approach. It had slowed dramatically and now hovered at the edge of Earth's atmosphere. "It's positioning itself over the Central Pacific," she noted, "away from population centers, or preparing to target multiple continents simultaneously," countered a grim-faced military analyst. At 14:37 Korean Standard Time, all communication systems worldwide, television, radio, internet, phone networks, experienced a momentary disruption. When signals returned, they carried an unexpected message. An image appeared on screens everywhere, a humanoid figure with blue-tinged skin, large vertical-lidded eyes, and delicate features. It spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "People of Earth, I am Ambassador Taehyun of the Keldorian civilization. We come seeking sanctuary. Our world is dying." The command center erupted in controlled chaos. General Kim barked orders to verify the broadcast's origin and check defense systems. Hannah remained transfixed by the alien face on the screen as it continued. "We are a peaceful species facing extinction. Our planet's core is destabilizing, threatening our entire civilization. We request permission to establish diplomatic contact to discuss possible cooperation." The broadcast ended with a series of mathematical sequences that Hannah immediately recognized as coordinates, a proposed meeting location in international waters. "They want to talk," she said, turning to General Kim. "And they're smart enough to suggest neutral territory." The general's expression was unreadable, or they're luring our representatives into a trap. "If they wanted to attack us, why announce themselves?" Hannah argued. "With their technology, they could have struck without warning." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of emergency United Nations sessions, military preparedness drills, and public information management. Citizens worldwide reacted with a mixture of fear, religious fervor, and fascination. Some cities reported panic, while others saw people gathering in public spaces, eyes turned skyward. Hannah found herself unexpectedly summoned to the president's office. When she arrived, she was surprised to find not only Korean officials, but also representatives from China, Japan, the United States, and Russia. "Dr. Park," the president greeted her, "you were the first to spot our visitors. The international community has agreed to send a response team to meet with these Keldorians. We want you on that team." "Me? I'm an astronomer, not a diplomat." "Exactly," said the American representative. "We need scientists alongside our diplomats and security personnel, someone who can understand their technology and evaluate their claims." 3 hours later, Hannah found herself on a military aircraft heading toward the designated coordinates in the Pacific. The contact team consisted of 15 people, diplomats from the UN and major powers, military officers, scientific experts, and linguists. As they approached the meeting point, Hannah gazed out the window at the alien vessel hovering above the ocean. It was unlike anything she had imagined, an elongated, iridescent structure that seemed to shift colors with the changing light, with no visible propulsion system. "Remarkable," she whispered. "Their energy management must be incredibly advanced." The military ship serving as their meeting platform had already been positioned below the alien craft. As their helicopter descended to the deck, Hannah saw that extensive security measures were in place, with armed personnel stationed throughout the vessel. "Remember the protocols," General Kim reminded everyone as they prepared to disembark. "No sudden movements. Basic greetings only until we establish communication parameters. Dr. Park, stay close to me." A designated area on the ship's deck had been prepared for the meeting. As the human delegation took their positions, a beam of light appeared from the alien vessel, widening into a column that reached the deck. 3 figures materialized within the light. The central figure Hannah recognized as Ambassador Taeyeon from the broadcast. He was flanked by 2 others, one female-appearing Keldorian, and one whose purpose seemed protective based on their stance. The ambassador stepped forward, raising a 4-fingered hand in greeting. "Thank you for meeting with us. I am Taeyeon, representative of the Keldorian High Council. This is Scientist Daeyeon and Security Coordinator Juno." To everyone's surprise, he spoke in clear, accented English. He gestured to a small device at his throat. "This translator analyzes your languages and converts our speech. We have studied your world for some time." The UN representative stepped forward. "I am Secretary Chen, representing Earth's United Nations. We received your message. You said your world is dying." "Yes." Taeyeon gestured, and a holographic image appeared between them. A beautiful blue-green planet with swirling storms across its surface. "This is Astralis, our homeworld. Its core is destabilizing due to quantum fluctuations we cannot control. Within half a solar cycle, approximately 6 of your months, it will collapse." Scientist Daeyeon stepped forward, her movements careful and precise. "We have tried every solution within our technological capabilities. We failed. 12 million Keldorians face extinction unless we find sanctuary." The human delegation exchanged glances. General Kim spoke next, his voice measured. "You're asking to relocate your entire civilization to Earth." "Not immediately," Taeyeon clarified. "We seek permission to establish a refugee settlement for an initial group. We offer knowledge and technology in exchange for your help." "Why Earth?" Hannah found herself asking. "Surely with your technology, you could find an uninhabited planet." Taeyeon's vertical eyelids flickered, some kind of emotional response. "We need specific conditions to survive. And," he hesitated, "we need help. Your species solves problems differently than ours. Your creativity may be our salvation." The meeting continued for hours, with both sides asking questions, explaining positions, and establishing basic protocols. As darkness fell over the Pacific, Secretary Chen announced that the world's governments would need time to consider the Keldorian request. As the human delegation prepared to depart, Hannah noticed scientist Dagon approaching her. "Dr. Park," the alien said, "you were the first to see us coming." Hannah nodded. "I was monitoring that sector of space." A fortunate coincidence. Daeyeon's translator couldn't quite capture the emotion in her voice, but Hannah sensed something like desperate hope. "Your world has many divisions, many fears. Will your people help us?" Before Hannah could answer, General Kim called her to the helicopter. Back in Seoul, the debate raged in emergency sessions of government. Similar discussions were happening worldwide as humanity faced its first contact with an alien civilization, one that came not as conquerors but as refugees. 3 days after the initial meeting, the United Nations issued a preliminary response. The Keldorians would be permitted to establish a small temporary settlement in an internationally administered zone for further negotiation. As Hannah watched the broadcast of the Keldorian ship descending to the designated area, she whispered, "Everything changes now." Beside her, General Kim nodded. "For better or worse, Dr. Park. For better or worse." The sun rose over what had once been an empty stretch of New Zealand coastline. Now it was called Settlement 1, home to 500 Keldorian refugees. 2 months had passed since the first landing, and the settlement had taken shape with remarkable speed. Crystalline structures glinted in the morning light, a stark contrast to the human military buildings that surrounded them. Hannah Park adjusted her badge as she passed through the security checkpoint. As the senior scientific liaison, she had visited the settlement almost daily since its establishment, but the guards still checked her credentials carefully each time. "Good morning, Dr. Park," said the guard, handing back her ID. "The ambassador is waiting for you near the central dome." Hannah found Taeyeon where he often was at this hour, observing human and Keldorian technicians working together on the settlement's environmental systems. The blue-skinned ambassador turned at her approach, his vertical eyelids blinking in what she now recognized as a greeting. "Dr. Park, thank you for coming so early. You mentioned there was something you wanted to show me." Taeyeon nodded, gesturing toward one of the smaller structures. "Our first successful adaptation of your agricultural methods to our needs. It's quite remarkable." As they walked through the settlement, Hannah noticed how the Keldorians moved with careful precision, their actions methodical and planned. By contrast, the human workers seemed chaotic, calling to each other, changing tasks, improvising solutions on the spot. "Your people approach problems so differently," Taeyeon observed, following her gaze. "We calculate precise solutions. You experiment." Hannah smiled. "Sometimes the perfect answer isn't the right one." An interesting concept. Taeyeon's translator couldn't quite capture the nuances of his tone, but Hannah had learned to read his body language. He was genuinely curious. "For us, precision has always been valued above all. It is challenging to accept imperfection." They entered a domed structure filled with strange plants, modified Earth species altered to provide nutrients the Keldorians needed. "Scientist Daeyeon worked with your botanists on this project," Taeyeon explained. "The first batch failed completely. The second had limited success. This third attempt." A female Keldorian approached them, her slender frame moving gracefully between the plant beds. Daeyeon's skin had a slightly greener tint than Taeyeon's, marking her as from a different region of their lost planet. "Dr. Park," she greeted, "the hybrid plants are thriving. Your Dr. Lee suggested we introduce certain fungi to the soil, an approach that violated 17 of our agricultural principles." Her inner eyelids flickered in what Hannah had learned was amusement. "Yet the results are undeniable." "That's wonderful news," Hannah said, genuinely pleased. Food adaptation had been one of the biggest challenges for the refugees. "It is more than that," Daeyeon replied. "It represents a fundamental shift in our approach. For thousands of years, we have refined our methods toward mathematical perfection. Now we must learn to Experiment. Outside the agricultural dome, they continued their tour. Children were the most recent arrivals. 50 young Keldorians brought to Earth after the settlement was deemed stable. They gathered in a learning area, their large eyes fixed on tablets showing Earth geography and language lessons. They adapt more easily than the adults, Taehyun noted. Already they use human expressions and gestures. One small Keldorian child noticed them watching and waved, a distinctly human greeting. Hana waved back, smiling. Not everyone is pleased with these changes, Taehyun said quietly. Some elders believe we risk losing our cultural identity by adopting human ways. Hana nodded. Cultural preservation is important, but adaptation is necessary for survival. A balance we must find, he agreed. Speaking of challenges, the World Security Council meets tomorrow to discuss the next phase of refugee admissions. Our request for 2,000 more individuals has met with resistance. Across the world in Seoul, Jinwoo Park, no relation to Dr. Hana Park, stood on a makeshift platform in a city park. Despite the light rain, nearly 300 people had gathered to hear him speak. His Earth First movement had grown from a handful of concerned citizens to a global network in just weeks. They told us it would be temporary, he shouted into a megaphone. They told us it would be just a few hundred. Now they want thousands more. Where does it end? When all 12 million arrive? The crowd murmured in agreement. Many held signs with slogans like "Human Jobs for Human Workers" and "Protect Earth Resources." The politicians talk about the advanced technology the aliens have shared, Jinwoo continued. But what has changed for ordinary people like us? Our taxes fund their settlement while our own communities struggle. At the edge of the crowd, 2 police officers watched carefully. Should we shut this down? The younger officer asked. They have a permit, his superior replied. As long as it stays peaceful, we observe only. Jinwoo raised his voice for the climax of his speech. They'll drain our resources. Earth for humans. The crowd took up the chant. Earth for humans. Earth for humans. What neither Jinwoo nor the watching officers noticed was a slim figure at the back of the crowd, recording everything on a small device. Minjin, a university student who had infiltrated the Earth First movement, slipped away as the rally ended. He needed to get this footage to his contact at the United Nations monitoring team. Back at Settlement 1, Hana and Taehyun finished their tour on a viewing platform overlooking the ocean. The sun was high now, glinting off the water. Your oceans still amaze me, Taehyun said. Astralis had only small seas. Nothing so vast. I've been meaning to ask, Hana said carefully. The data you shared about your planet's destruction. Some of our scientists have questions about the timeline. Taehyun was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower. What do they question specifically? The rate of core deterioration. Some think it's accelerating faster than your models predicted. The ambassador's posture changed subtly, a tensing she had learned to recognize as stress. Your scientists are perceptive. The High Council chose to present a moderated version of our situation. We feared causing panic. How much time is really left? 3 of your months, perhaps 4. Taehyun turned to face her directly. The next transport must be approved, Hana. Every day matters now. It was the first time he had used her first name. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. I'll do what I can at tomorrow's council meeting, she promised. That evening, in a secure conference room in Wellington, Hana presented her findings to the World Security Council representatives. The cultural exchange program has shown promising results, she explained, showing slides of joint human-Keldorian projects. Their quantum computing advances have already helped us make breakthroughs in climate modeling. Our agricultural techniques are helping them establish food independence. General Kim, representing South Korea, leaned forward. And the concerns about resource consumption? Exaggerated, Hana said firmly. The Keldorians are actually using fewer resources per capita than we anticipated. Their efficiency is remarkable. The American representative, Dr. Tanner, raised a hand. We've received reports of growing anti-alien sentiment worldwide. The Earth First movement claims the Keldorians plan to eventually take over. Baseless fear-mongering, Hannah replied. But dangerous, which is why I believe transparency is our best approach. The Keldorians have shared everything we've asked for: scientific knowledge, cultural information, even their historical records. The UN chairperson nodded. Thank you, Dr. Park. We'll take your recommendations under advisement before tomorrow's vote. As the meeting adjourned, General Kim approached Hannah privately. You've become quite the advocate for our visitors, Dr. Park. I'm an advocate for facts, General. And the fact is, they need our help. Just be careful. Your name has appeared on Earth First forums. They're calling you a species traitor. Hannah felt a chill, but kept her expression neutral. Charming. Is that supposed to intimidate me? No, it's supposed to make you careful. The general handed her a small card. My direct line. Any threats, any concerns, you call immediately. In his apartment in Seoul, Jinwoo scrolled through messages from Earth First supporters worldwide. The movement was growing faster than he had anticipated. A message appeared from a new contact, someone using the name Patriot. Protests aren't enough. Words aren't enough. The aliens understand only action. We have people inside the security perimeter at Settlement 1. Time to show humanity's strength. Jinwoo stared at the message, his finger hovering over the reply button. This was further than he had intended to go. He believed in protecting Earth's resources, in questioning the wisdom of accepting millions of refugees. But violence. After a long moment, he typed, "No, we make our point peacefully or not at all." The response came seconds later. Too late. Plan already in motion. Watch the news tomorrow. Jinwoo grabbed his phone, but who could he call? The police would arrest him immediately. After a moment's hesitation, he pulled up the government contact page and found the emergency line for the Keldorian Settlement Liaison Office. As dawn broke over Settlement 1 the next day, Hannah arrived early for the council vote. Security was tighter than usual. Her warning call had been taken seriously. She found Taehyun waiting anxiously at the entrance to the main administrative building. "I received your message," he said immediately. "A potential threat?" "Yes, but security has been enhanced. The vote will proceed as planned." What neither of them knew was that the real threat wasn't to the settlement itself, but to the underwater power cable connecting it to the mainland grid. As they entered the building, explosives planted by Earth First extremists detonated, cutting power to the entire settlement. For most facilities, backup systems would engage immediately. But for the Keldorian environmental processors, the devices that made Earth's atmosphere compatible with their biology, even a momentary disruption could be catastrophic. The settlement plunged into darkness as alarms began to sound. The emergency systems had stabilized Settlement 1, but the sabotage attempt made one thing clear: the Keldorians needed a more permanent solution. 2 weeks after the attack, the World Security Council approved the construction of a self-sufficient Keldorian city on an isolated island in the South Pacific. As construction began, Hannah found herself summoned to a new laboratory complex built adjacent to the settlement. Inside, she found scientist Daevon surrounded by complex holographic displays showing molecular structures. "Dr. Park, thank you for coming," Daevon said, her usually composed voice tinged with urgency. "We face a challenge that may determine the future of our entire species." Daevon gestured to a sealed chamber where 3 young Keldorian children were being examined by medical staff. Even to Hannah's untrained eye, something seemed wrong with them. Their skin lacked the healthy blue luster of adult Keldorians, and their movements were sluggish. "The children who arrived in the second transport are showing signs of developmental regression," Daevon explained. "We anticipated this possibility, but it has occurred faster than our models predicted." Hannah moved closer to the holographic display. "What's causing it?" Earth's atmosphere lacks a compound essential for our physiological development. Daeun manipulated the display, zooming in on a complex molecular structure. Without the compound, our children cannot develop properly, Daeun explained, showing the molecular structure. Adults can survive without it for several years, but children need it for proper neural and skeletal formation. Can't you synthesize it? Your chemical technology is far advanced beyond ours. Daeun's inner eyelids flickered, a sign of distress that Hana had learned to recognize. On Australis, the compound formed naturally in our atmosphere due to specific radiation patterns from our sun interacting with minerals in our soil. We never needed to synthesize it artificially. When we realized Earth lacked these conditions, our scientists attempted to create a synthetic version. Without success. Hana guessed. Correct. The molecular bonds are highly unstable under Earth conditions. Every attempt at synthesis has failed. Daeun's voice grew quieter. Without this compound, the children will continue to deteriorate, and no new children can be born on Earth. The implication was clear. Even if all 12 million Keldorians could be evacuated to Earth, their species would die out within a generation. Hana studied the molecular structure. I'd like to assemble a team of human scientists to work on this. Fresh perspectives might help. Ambassador Taeyun has already approved such collaboration. We have prepared all our research data for your team. 3 days later, Hana's hastily assembled team gathered in a new laboratory built specifically for this project. She had selected experts from different disciplines and different thinking styles, a deliberate contrast to the methodical Keldorian approach. Dr. Minji Song, a quantum physicist with an unorthodox approach to theoretical problems, examined the holographic models with fascination. These molecular bonds shouldn't be possible at all according to our understanding of physics. The Keldorians must have an entirely different model of quantum interactions. Next to her, Dr. Huxley, a chemist known for his brilliant but chaotic work style, peered at actual samples of astralis soil that the Keldorians had brought to Earth. Unlike the meticulous Minji, Hux's workstation was a mess of notes, coffee cups, and seemingly random equipment. The structure reminds me of certain compounds we've observed in deep-sea volcanic vents, he muttered, more to himself than the others. Daeun watched them with barely concealed skepticism. Keldorian laboratories were models of precision and order. This human approach seemed haphazard at best. For 2 weeks, the joint team worked around the clock. The Keldorians continued their methodical approach, testing variations of synthetic processes one by one. The humans were more scattered, pursuing multiple approaches simultaneously. Tensions occasionally flared. Daeun found Hux's disorganized methods particularly disturbing. How can you track experimental variables in such chaos? She asked one day, looking at his cluttered workspace. Hux just shrugged. Sometimes chaos reveals patterns that order conceals. By the end of the 2nd week, the Keldorian children's condition had worsened. 2 had been placed in stasis chambers to slow the progression of their symptoms. During an evening briefing, Minji presented her analysis to the team. Keldorian science says this is impossible, she said, pointing to the molecular simulation. The energy required to maintain these bonds under Earth conditions exceeds what our current technology can provide. Even with Keldorian equipment, the synthetic compound breaks down within minutes. The room fell silent. Even the humans felt the weight of what this meant for the refugees. Then we need a catalyst, Hux said suddenly, breaking the silence. Something that exists on Earth that can stabilize the bonds. We have tested 1,742 potential catalysts, Daeun replied. None were effective. You tested what you expected might work, Hux countered. But what about something unexpected? The next morning, the team reconvened with renewed determination. Hana had authorized them to requisition any materials they needed, no matter how strange the request might seem. Hux arrived carrying a container of mud from a volcanic hot spring. Minji brought samples of rare earth minerals. Other team members contributed equally diverse materials, all long shots based on hunches rather than methodical science. Daeun watched with a mixture of hope and doubt as they began testing these seemingly random substances. "I do not understand this approach," she confided to Hana. "There is no systematic pattern to their experimentation." "That's the point," Hana replied. "When logical approaches fail, sometimes intuition succeeds." On the 5th day of this new approach, the lad was quieter than usual. The earlier excitement had given way to fatigue as one attempt after another failed. Huck sat alone at his workstation, staring at a sample of the unstable compound through a microscope. He reached for his coffee, knocking over the cup in his exhaustion. Coffee splashed across his desk, some of it dropping into an open sample dish containing a mixture he'd been working on, a combination of deep-sea vent minerals and synthetic components based on the Keldorian formula. "Damn it," he muttered, reaching for a cloth. But then he froze, staring at the sample dish. Where the coffee had spilled, the mixture was changing color, shifting from pale blue to a deeper, more vibrant hue. Huck grabbed a scanner and held it over the sample. His eyes widened. "That's impossible," he whispered. Then louder, "Minji, Daeun, everyone, come look at this." The team gathered around his workstation as he pointed to the scanner readings. "The molecular bonds are stabilizing," Minji said in disbelief. "How?" "Good thing we don't know that," replied Huck, spilling his coffee into a sample that unexpectedly catalyzed a reaction. "I literally spilled my coffee. Something in it is acting as a catalyst." Daeun's vertical eyelids blinked rapidly, the Keldorian equivalent of astonishment. "Coffee? An earth beverage is stabilizing a compound our science couldn't create." "Not the coffee itself," Minji said, already running analysis on the sample. "It must be a specific compound in it, interacting with your formula and these minerals." For the next 12 hours, the lab was a flurry of activity as they isolated the exact components causing the reaction. It turned out to be a particular polyphenol in the coffee interacting with a deep-sea mineral and the Keldorian base formula. By morning, they had produced a stable sample of the atmospheric compound large enough for testing. Daeun carefully placed it in an environmental chamber and introduced a small amount of air from the children's medical unit. "The compound is maintaining stability," she announced, her voice filled with an emotion that transcended species differences. "The reaction is self-sustaining." Hana placed a hand on Huck's shoulder. "A brilliant accident." "The best kind of science," he replied with a tired smile. 3 days later, after rigorous testing, the compound was deemed safe for trial use. One of the Keldorian children, a young female named Sora, was selected for the first treatment. The medical team created a small chamber filled with air infused with the synthetic compound. Hana, Daeun, Huck, and Minji watched anxiously as Sora was placed in the chamber. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, gradually, her pale blue skin began to regain its luster. Her movements, previously sluggish and uncoordinated, became more fluid. After 4 hours, the medical team performed a cellular scan. The results were projected for all to see. Cellular degradation had not only stopped but begun to reverse. "It's working," Daeun said softly, her scientific detachment momentarily giving way to visible relief. As news of the breakthrough spread through Settlement 1, the mood shifted from one of quiet desperation to cautious hope. For the first time since arriving on Earth, the Keldorians could envision a future for their children. That evening, Ambassador Daeun held a small ceremony to honor the scientific team. He stood before them, his usually formal demeanor softened with genuine emotion. "When our world began to die, we thought our greatest loss would be our home," he said, "but we came to realize that the true threat was to our future, our children. Today, you have given that future back to us." He turned to Huck. "Your methods seemed chaotic to us, imprecise, against everything our scientific tradition values. Yet you found in an accident what we could not find through perfect calculation." Huck shifted uncomfortably under the attention. "That's how science often works. We fail and fail until suddenly we succeed, often in ways we never expected." Later that night, as most of the settlement slept, Hannah found Daeun still in the laboratory, reviewing the data from their success. "You should rest," Hannah suggested. "Tomorrow we need to scale up production." Daeun looked up from her work. "I am processing what happened today. Not just the scientific breakthrough, but what it means for how we think." "How so?" "For thousands of years, Kildorian science has valued precision and predictability. We built our civilization on the belief that with enough calculation, all problems could be solved." She gestured to Cook's still cluttered workstation. "Today, chaos solved what precision could not. An accident accomplished what deliberate design failed to achieve." Hannah smiled. "Maybe that's the real cultural exchange. Not just sharing knowledge, but sharing different ways of thinking." Outside the laboratory window, the lights of Settlement 1 glowed against the night sky. In the medical facility, Kildorian children breathed air infused with an impossible compound created through an improbable accident. The first generation of a species with a future restored by spilled coffee and scientific chaos. The Kildorian High Council's transport arrived with minimal fanfare. Just another ship landing at what humans now called New Horizon City. What had begun as Settlement 1 had evolved into a thriving community of 10,000 Kildorian refugees, with more arriving each month. Elder Juu stood at the ship's exit ramp, his aged blue skin catching the sunlight. As the oldest living member of the High Council, he had resisted coming to Earth until now. But the success of the atmospheric compound had finally convinced him to make the journey to inspect the progress personally. Ambassador Taeyeon greeted him with the traditional Kildorian salute, hands crossed at the chest, head slightly bowed. "Elder Juu, welcome to Earth. Your presence honors us." "The honor is conditional upon what I find here, Ambassador," the elder replied, his translator conveying his formal tone perfectly. "I remain skeptical of many of your reports." Behind Taeyeon, Dr. Hannah Park shifted uncomfortably. She had been warned about the elder's traditional views, but his coldness still surprised her. "This is Dr. Park," Taeyeon said, gesturing toward Hannah, "the human scientist who helped lead the compound synthesis project." Elder Juu regarded her with vertical eyelids half closed, a sign of reservation or judgment. "Yes, the coffee incident. I have read the reports." Hannah bowed slightly. "It's an honor to meet you, Elder. We're excited to show you our progress. Progress built on accident rather than design," he noted. "But I will reserve judgment until I have observed everything." As they traveled by electric transport to the production facility, Hannah pointed out features of the growing city: the integrated housing designed for both human and Kildorian comfort, the shared agricultural domes, the new educational center where children of both species study together. "You've allowed human children into the city?" Elder Juu asked, sounding concerned. "Yes," Taeyeon replied. "The cultural exchange program has been highly successful. Human families work here, and their children attend our schools. In turn, some Kildorian students attend human schools in nearby Wellington." The elder made a sound that the translator didn't capture, something between disapproval and surprise. Their first stop was the atmospheric compound production facility, a sprawling complex where the life-saving substance was manufactured in quantities sufficient for all Kildorian children on Earth and the thousands more scheduled to arrive. Inside the main production hall, Dr. Hyuk Lee greeted them with characteristic enthusiasm. His lab coat was stained with coffee, now a running joke among the staff. "Elder Juu, an honor. Let me show you how we've scaled the process." The production line was a strange hybrid of Kildorian precision technology and human improvisation. Gleaming Kildorian processing units stood alongside equipment that looked almost cobbled together, modifications made by the human engineers to handle unexpected variables in the synthesis. "This solution is chaotic," Elder Juu protested, examining the synthesis process. His fingers traced over a diagram showing how coffee compounds were extracted and refined to serve as catalysts. "There is no elegance to it, no mathematical perfection. But it works," Taehyun countered. The compound stability rate is 99.7%, higher than we ever achieved on Astralis. At what cost to our methodological principles? The elder asked. For generations, we have valued precision and order. Now I see our technology jury-rigged with pipes and valves that look handmade. Hyuk grinned. Those are my special modifications. The original Kildorian components couldn't handle the temperature fluctuations from the catalyst reaction, so we added these cooling bypasses. He patted a section of equipment that indeed looked handcrafted. Not pretty, but effective. The elder's disapproval was palpable, but he continued the tour without further comment. Their next stop was the Children's Development Center, where the results of their work were evident. Young Kildorians who had once been listless and weak now played and studied with healthy energy. Sora, the first child to receive the treatment, now served as a young ambassador of sorts. She approached Elder Juwu without hesitation. "Welcome to Earth, Elder," she said in perfect English, then switched to the Keldorian language for a traditional greeting. Juwu responded formally, but Hannah noticed a softening in his demeanor as he spoke with the child. "Your health appears excellent," he noted. "The treatment has been effective for you." "Yes, Elder. I breathe the compound daily. The doctors say my development is now ahead of standard metrics." She gestured to a human child nearby. "This is my friend Emma. We study mathematics together." After the tour of the children's facility, they'd proceeded to the research center where Dr. Minju-song was leading a team working on the next challenge, adapting Earth's environment for long-term Keldorian habitation. "The current system requires ongoing production of the atmospheric compound," Minji explained. "But we're exploring ways to create self-sustaining biospheres where the compound would be generated naturally, using Earth plants modified with Keldorian genetic material," Taehyun added. "Another example of combining our knowledge systems." Elder Juwu studied the research displays with greater interest. "This appears more methodical than the compound production. We've learned to balance both approaches," Hannah explained. "Keldorian precision guides our overall framework, while we leave room for human intuition and experimentation within that structure." As their tour continued into the afternoon, security alerts began appearing on Taehyun's communication device. He checked them discreetly, but Hannah noticed his growing tension. "Is something wrong?" she asked quietly, while Elder Juwu was occupied examining a cultural exhibit. "Possibly. There are protests gathering near the western perimeter. Security is monitoring the situation." Earth-first demonstrations had become more frequent as the Keldorian population on Earth grew. Most were peaceful, if hostile. But after the sabotage attempt months earlier, everyone remained vigilant. They completed the tour and returned to the Central Administration Building for a formal meeting with the Joint Human Keldorian Governing Council. Elder Juwu had just begun his address when the first alarm sounded. "Security breach at Western Checkpoint 3, announced an automated voice. "All non-essential personnel evacuate to designated shelters." Taehyun immediately activated the command center display. Security feeds showed a disturbing scene. A large truck had smashed through the outer perimeter fence, and masked figures were pouring through the gap. Some carried makeshift weapons. Others threw incendiary devices at nearby structures. "Earth for humans," they chanted, their voices audible even through the security feed. "Jinwoo's followers," Hannah said grimly. Despite his public disavowal of violence, the radical faction of Earth First had continued to grow under new leadership. "They're heading for the compound production facility," Taehyun realized. "They know exactly where to strike." Elder Juwu watched the security feeds with astonishment. These humans would attack children, prevent their treatment. "Not all humans," Hannah reminded him. "A small radical group." Taehyun was already coordinating with security forces. "The facility has its own protection systems, but if they breach the main production hall, the current synthesis batch would be lost," Huck said, checking his tablet. "And we're at a critical stage. The catalyst reaction is particularly volatile right now." Hannah made a quick decision. "Huck, Minji, get to the emergency shelter with the council members. Taehyun and I will go to the facility. I know how to stabilize the reaction manually if the automated systems fail. Despite security's objections, Hana and Taehyun took an emergency vehicle to the production facility. They could see smoke rising from several locations where the attackers had thrown incendiary devices. Security forces were engaging the intruders, but some had broken through toward the facility. They entered through a service entrance, rushing to the main control room. Through the observation window, they could see the production line still operating, the current batch of atmospheric compound at its most critical phase. The automated systems are still functioning, Taehyun noted with relief. Then the building shook violently. Emergency lights flashed as the facility shook as explosions rocked the perimeter. Jinwoo's followers had breached security. They've hit the power distribution node. Taehyun shouted over the alarms. We're switching to backup power, but there will be a 3-second gap. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, the only illumination came from the glowing reaction chambers where the compound was being synthesized. Without the control systems regulating temperature and pressure, the delicate catalyst reaction began to destabilize. When emergency power came on seconds later, warning signals flashed across all displays. The automated system had failed to restart properly. The reaction is destabilizing, Taehyun said, his fingers flying across the control panel. If it collapses completely, we lose the entire production batch, a week's supply for the children. We need to manually adjust the catalyst flow, Hana said, moving to a separate control station. I'll regulate the temperature, you handle the pressure gradients. They worked frantically, trying to bring the volatile reaction back into balance. Outside, they could hear security forces engaging with the attackers, the sounds of conflict getting closer. Temperature is still climbing, Hana warned. The coolant bypass isn't responding. Switching to secondary systems, Taehyun responded, pressure stabilizing at 87% of optimal. Hana reached for a manual override switch at the same moment Taehyun extended his hand toward it. Their hands touched briefly over the controls, two species united by crisis. For a moment, their eyes met, human brown eyes looking into vertical-lidded alien ones, both filled with the same determination. Together, they activated the emergency protocols that Guk had designed, the chaotic system that Elder Juwu had criticized. The reaction chamber pulsed with energy, then gradually stabilized as the hybrid systems brought the synthesis back under control. It's working, Hana said with relief. Catalyst reaction restabilizing. The facility shook again as another explosion sounded, closer this time. Through the reinforced windows, they could see attackers being driven back by security forces, but the fighting was intense. We need to complete the current synthesis cycle, Taehyun said. Once it reaches the preservation phase, it can withstand power fluctuations. They worked side by side for the next 10 minutes, making constant adjustments as the facility's systems were affected by the attack. Finally, the status indicators shifted to green. The batch was complete and safely preserved. We did it, Hana said, allowing herself to breathe normally for the first time since they'd entered the facility. Security forces had contained the attack, driving most of the Earth-First extremists back beyond the perimeter. The damage assessment was beginning as Hana and Taehyun emerged from the production facility to find Elder Juwu waiting with a security detail. You both took an unacceptable risk, the Elder said sternly. Ambassador Taehyun, your position does not allow for such direct endangerment. With respect, Elder, Taehyun replied, the compound batch at risk represented treatment for 3,000 children. The risk was necessary. The Elder turned his attention to Hana. And you, Dr. Park, you placed yourself in danger for our children. They're children, she said simply. Species doesn't matter when children are at risk. Elder Juwu was silent for a moment, his ancient eyes studying both of them. I have spent today observing what you have built here. I came expecting to find our principles compromised, our methods corrupted by human chaos. He gestured to the facility behind them. Instead, I found something unexpected, something new. He straightened formally. The chaotic human approach alone would not have saved our species. Our Keldorian precision alone would have failed. But together, the elder made a gesture Hannah had never seen before, his hands moving from separate positions to intertwined fingers. Together, they create something stronger than either alone. Later that evening, as the city's security was reinforced and repairs began, the elder addressed the Joint Council again. His formal speech had been replaced by something more personal. "Today I witnessed an attack meant to divide us," he said. "Instead, it has convinced me of what Ambassador Taehyun has reported all along, that our future lies not in preserving our ways unchanged, but in finding a new path forward together." He turned to Hannah. "Your Dr. Park risked her life today for Keldorian children. I can no longer see humans as simply hosts or allies of convenience. You are becoming part of our story, as we are becoming part of yours." As the meeting concluded, Taehyun walked with Hannah through the recovering city. Emergency teams worked to repair damage from the attack, humans and Keldorians working side by side. "The Elder's endorsement will change everything," Taehyun said. "The High Council will now fully support integration rather than just temporary settlement." "And what about the attackers?" Hannah asked. "This won't be the last attempt." "No," Taehyun agreed. "Fear and hatred exist in both our species, but today showed something stronger exists as well." He hesitated, then extended his hand in the human gesture of friendship that he had learned. Perhaps Elder Juwu was right. Neither human chaos nor Keldorian precision alone will secure our future, but together. Hannah took his offered hand, smiling. "Together, we have a chance." The southern coast of New Zealand had transformed. What began as an emergency refugee settlement was now becoming a true city, New Horizon, the first permanent Keldorian human community on Earth. Buildings of blended architectural styles rose against the landscape, crystalline Keldorian structures alongside more traditional human designs, all integrated into the natural environment. 6 months had passed since the attack on the compound production facility. That day had marked a turning point. Elder Juwu's endorsement had swayed the Keldorian High Council to fully commit to Earth as their new home. Meanwhile, the human response to the attack had been unexpected. Instead of increasing fear and opposition, images of Keldorian and human security forces working together to protect children had shifted public opinion significantly. Hannah Park walked through the central plaza of New Horizon, taking in the changes. Construction crews worked on new buildings. Human and Keldorian children played together in a park designed for both species. Overhead, a transport shuttle arrived from orbit, another group of refugees from the evacuation fleet. She stopped at a small cafe that served both human and Keldorian refreshments. The Earth-first attack had delayed her planned return to her research position in Seoul. Somehow, 6 months later, she was still here, now serving as the chief scientific liaison between the two species. "Dr. Park," a small voice called out. Sora, the Keldorian child who had first received the atmospheric compound treatment, ran toward her. Now fully recovered, she moved with the natural grace of her species. A small device at her throat translated her words instantly. "Hello, Sora," Hannah smiled. "How are your studies going?" "Excellent. I'm learning Earth mathematics now. It's different from our systems, more intuitive, less structured." The child's vertical eyelids blinked happily. "Are you coming to the nursery opening?" "All the scientists are invited." "I wouldn't miss it," Hannah assured her. The new nursery complex had been Daeum's project for months, a facility designed specifically for Keldorian children, with the atmospheric compound integrated into its environmental systems. It represented a major step forward from the emergency treatments of the early days. When Hannah arrived at the complex that afternoon, she found a celebration already underway. The central atrium was filled with Keldorian families and human officials. Light filtered through crystalline panels overhead, creating patterns on the floor that shifted with the sun's movement. 6 months later, the Keldorian children played in the new settlement's nursery, their atmosphere processors humming efficiently. Dozens of young Keldorians moved through specially designed play areas, their once-endangered development now proceeding normally. Medical monitoring devices took readings discreetly, feeding data to research teams still refining the treatment protocols. Ambassador Tae-yun stood at the center of the atrium with President Lee of South Korea, who had arrived for the ceremony. South Korea had been among the first nations to fully support the Keldorian settlement, providing critical technology and expertise. Our council has voted to share our quantum knowledge, Tae-yun told President Lee. The full database of our quantum computing technology will be made available to Earth's scientific community. The president's expression showed careful restraint, but everyone understood the significance of this announcement. Keldorian quantum technology was decades, perhaps centuries, beyond Earth's current capabilities. Its applications for clean energy alone would transform human civilization. This is more than we expected, Ambassador, President Lee replied. Such technology represents a tremendous leap forward for humanity. It represents fair exchange, Tae-yun said. Your world has given our children a future. We offer the means for your children to have a better one as well. Across the room, Hannah noticed Hook and Dae-yun deep in conversation beside a complex holographic display. The unlikely partnership between the chaotic human chemist and the precise Keldorian scientist had continued beyond the initial breakthrough. Together, they had refined the atmospheric compound production process, making it more efficient and stable. Hannah approached them, catching the end of their conversation. And with these modifications, production capacity could increase by 37%, Dae-yun was saying, her slender blue fingers manipulating the holographic model. 37 exactly. Hike teased, not 37.1 or 36.9. To Hannah's surprise, Dae-yun made a sound she had never heard from a Keldorian before, something like a laugh. Your imprecision is contagious, Dr. Lee. Perhaps 36 to 38%. A range. I'm finally corrupting you with human thinking, Huck declared triumphantly. Dae-yun noticed Hannah and straightened slightly, composing herself. Dr. Park, we were just discussing the expansion of production capabilities. So I heard, Hannah smiled. The collaboration seems to be going well. Dr. Lee's approach continues to be unorthodox, Dae-yun said, but effective. She hesitated, then added, we have submitted a joint research paper to both Keldorian and human scientific journals. I believe it's the first such cross-species publication. Congratulations, Hannah said. That's a significant milestone. Show her the other project, Hook prompted. Dae-yun's inner eyelids flickered, a sign of slight embarrassment. It's merely an experiment at this stage. But she adjusted the holographic display to show a different model, a complex biological system that Hannah didn't immediately recognize. Is that a plant? She asked. A hybrid, Dae-yun explained. Keldorian genetic material integrated with Earth plant biology. If successful, it would naturally produce the atmospheric compound as part of its respiration process, meaning you could eventually create entire self-sustaining ecosystems, Hannah realized. Children could live normally without artificial compounds. Precisely. Dae-yun glanced at Hook. The initial concept was Dr. Lee's, completely contrary to established Keldorian biological principles, of course. Of course, Hook grinned. That's my specialty, being contrary. But surprisingly viable, Dae-yun admitted. Our initial laboratory tests show a 73% success rate in gene expression. Across the atrium, musical tones announced the beginning of the formal ceremony. They moved to join the gathering crowd as President Lee and several Keldorian elders prepared to officially open the nursery complex. As they stood together, Hannah noticed a subtle change in Dae-yun's demeanor. The scientist was watching a group of Keldorian children being guided to their places for the ceremony, her expression uncharacteristically soft. They would not be here without your help, Dae-yun said quietly. None of this would exist. It was a team effort, Huck replied, unusually modest, and mostly an accident with spilled coffee, remember? An accident that saved our future. Daeun turned to face him directly. On Astralis, our scientific community valued certainty above all else. We calculated, analyzed, and proceeded only when success was statistically assured. Your method seemed chaotic, even reckless to me. They are reckless, Cook admitted. That's why they sometimes find solutions that careful planning misses. My entire life, Daeun continued, I believed in the superiority of Keldorian methodology. Then a human accident solved what our precision could not. She looked back at the children. It has caused me to reconsider many assumptions. The ceremony was about to begin, but Daeun surprised both humans by suddenly extending her arms and embracing Cook, a gesture she had learned from humans, but that Keldorians rarely performed. Daeun displayed unexpected emotion, embracing Cook after their successful collaboration. Perhaps we have more to learn from you than technology, she admitted. Cook stood frozen in surprise for a moment before awkwardly returning the embrace. Over Daeun's shoulder, he gave Hana a bewildered look that made her stifle a laugh. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. President Lee and Elder Juwu formally opened the nursery together, cutting a ribbon made of intertwined materials from both worlds. The children performed songs, some in Keldorian language, others in English, their voices blending in harmonies that somehow worked despite the different vocal structures of the two species. After the ceremony, Hannah found herself on one of the observation platforms overlooking the growing city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of descriptions she'd read of Astralis. Ambassador Taehyun joined her there, his diplomatic duties for the day complete. Quite a day, Hannah said. The nursery, the quantum knowledge-sharing announcement, Daehyun hugging Cook. That last one may be the most revolutionary, Taehyun said with surprising humor. Keldorians have traditionally considered physical contact to be inefficient for communication. And now we are learning that efficiency is not the only value worth considering. He gestured toward the city below, where lights were beginning to come on as darkness fell. Look at what we've built together in 6 months. Not just structures, but a true community. Below them, humans and Keldorians moved through the streets. A group of scientists from both species exited a research building, engaged in animated conversation. Construction crews finished their day's work. Families gathered for evening meals. The evacuation continues ahead of schedule, Taehyun said. Another 20,000 will arrive next month. With the new South Pacific territories granted by the United Nations, we can accommodate them all. And Astralis? Hannah asked quietly. Taehyun's expression sobered. The deterioration accelerates. Our monitoring ships report increased seismic activity. The estimates now give it less than 2 months. They stood in silence for a moment, acknowledging the imminent loss of an entire world. But its people will survive, Hannah said finally. Not just survive, thrive. Yes, Taehyun agreed, though in ways we never expected. When we first detected Earth and began studying your species, we saw primitive technology, environmental damage, constant conflict. We did not see the chaos that would save you, Hannah suggested. The creativity that would transform us, he corrected. Already, young Keldorians think differently than their parents. They ask why not, instead of calculating probabilities. They imagine possibilities instead of analyzing limitations. As darkness settled over New Horizon, the city glowed with blended technologies. Efficient Keldorian energy systems powered more fanciful human architectural lighting. The visual metaphor wasn't lost on either of them. New beginnings, Hannah said softly, for both our species. Indeed, Taehyun replied, though I suspect neither of us can truly imagine where this path leads. Below them, in the new nursery, Keldorian children dreamed under the protective embrace of Earth's sky, the first generation of a new civilization being born from the meeting of two worlds. The observatory at New Horizon University stood atop the highest hill overlooking the city. 10 years after the first Keldorian refugees had arrived on Earth, New Horizon had grown into a metropolis of over 2 million, roughly equal numbers of humans and Keldorians living and working together. Similar communities had sprung up around the world, though New Horizon remained the cultural and scientific center of the integrated civilization. In the observatory's main research lab, Dr. Davon frowned at the data streaming across her screens. For 3 weeks, she had been tracking anomalous readings in Earth's magnetosphere. At first, she had attributed them to normal fluctuations or instrument error, but the pattern was becoming undeniable. She touched a communication panel. "Dr. Park Tae-yun, could you come to the observatory? There's something you need to see." 30 minutes later, Hana Park Tae-yun arrived, her quick steps betraying concern. 10 years had added a few strands of gray to her hair, but her eyes remained sharp and alert. "What have you found?" she asked without preamble. Dae-yun displayed the data, a 3-dimensional model of Earth's protective magnetic field. Red areas showed weakening points that were growing larger each day. "The magnetosphere is destabilizing," Dae-yun explained. "The degradation began approximately 4 months ago, but has accelerated significantly in the past 3 weeks." Hannah studied the model, her expression darkening. "Cause? Unknown, but my analysis suggests it may be related to changes in Earth's core dynamics, possibly triggered by the same type of quantum fluctuations that destroyed Australis." The word hung between them. Australis. The Keldorian homeworld had collapsed into itself 8 years earlier, exactly as predicted. The evacuation had been completed just weeks before the final catastrophe. "We need more data," Hannah said, "and we need to inform the World Council immediately." Within days, a global scientific task force had been assembled. Research facilities worldwide confirmed Dae-yun's findings. Earth's magnetic shield was failing at an accelerating rate. The World Council convened an emergency session in New Horizon. Ambassador Tae-yun, now Earth Director of Keldorian Relations, stood before the assembled leaders. A decade on Earth had changed him subtly. His movements incorporated human gestures, and he had adopted some human clothing elements combined with traditional Keldorian designs. "We've compiled the combined findings of 17 research centers," he told the grim-faced council members. 10 years later, Earth's magnetosphere began failing. Keldorian sensors detected it first. He displayed the global model, now showing even larger areas of degradation. "We've calculated 18 months before radiation levels become lethal," said Tae-yun, now married to Hana. "Without the magnetosphere's protection, solar radiation will make Earth's surface uninhabitable." The council chamber erupted in urgent whispers. The Australian representative spoke first. "Are we looking at another Australis situation? Is Earth's core destabilizing?" "No," Hannah stepped forward to answer. "The core remains stable. This is different, a disruption specifically to the magnetic field generation. But the end result would be the same, an uninhabitable planet." "Can we evacuate?" asked the African Union representative. "The Keldorian fleet cannot possibly transport 12 billion people," Tae-yun finished, "and we have no suitable destination identified." "Then what options do we have?" The question came from President Min Ji-kim of the United Korean Republic, her voice cutting through the growing panic. "We need solutions, not evacuation plans," she continued. "Our civilizations united to save the Keldorians. Now we must unite again to save Earth." In the days that followed, research teams worked around the clock. The pattern was becoming clearer. Something was interfering with the electromagnetic dynamics of Earth's outer core, disrupting the geodynamo that generated the planet's protective field. In the Park Tae-yun household, discussions of the crisis continued long after working hours. Their home, designed with elements of both cultures, had become an unofficial thinking space where scientists and policy experts often gathered. 16-year-old Sora Park Tae-yun sat quietly in these discussions, absorbing everything. As the first human Keldorian hybrid, She had been the subject of scientific interest her entire life. Her existence had been possible only through advanced genetic engineering, a blend of human adaptability and Keldorian precision that had created something entirely new. Physically, she resembled her Keldorian father more than her human mother. Blue-tinged skin, larger eyes with vertical eyelids, but her thought patterns and emotional expressions were distinctly human, and her mind worked unlike either species, making connections others missed. One evening, as the scientific team discussed another failed model, Sora spoke up unexpectedly. "You're trying to repair the magnetosphere," she said. "What if we replace it instead?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "Explain," her mother prompted.